Okay, so now I'm at the point where I've called my images after I've imported them, and I'm ready to start editing. So the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the Develop module, and that's going to bring up a more detailed sliders and options for editing the image. And when you're in this view, you can just click anywhere and it'll zoom in, and you only get the one zoom in setting. So unfortunately you don't have different levels of zoom, but one little tip is this navigator window over here. You can actually move this box around. If you're trying to zoom in a certain spot and you're having trouble, you can move that box around, or you can directly click where you want to be zoomed into. Okay, so the first thing that I'm going to do is these images, a great deal of these ones in the beginning are a little bit too dark, so I'm going to bump this up a little bit. I always do exposure first. Exposure over contrast, because, or excuse me, exposure over color, because changing your color before you change your exposure, sometimes you have to end up going back and changing your color. It can throw your color off. So one thing I want to share with you, I know I touched on presets with you guys, and I actually have my own preset that I've come up with. So actually the first thing that I do is I'm going to select all of the images, and if I select, even with all the images selected, if I am in the Develop module and I select this preset, it's still only going to put the changes onto this image. So I'm actually going to hop back over to Library for a second, and then I'm going to, under Saved Presets, I'm going to apply my default preset. I'll show you what that does. It's one that I created. Go back to Develop. It reset what I just did, but what it does is it bumps up the contrast just a little bit, the clarity, which is kind of like sharpening, and the vibrance a little bit. So those are things that I always do to every image, and it's just those few settings. It doesn't do anything else, but it's just an automatic thing that is already done on all my images, and I don't have to touch those settings. So now I'm going to go back, and so I'm going to do my exposure first, get it to a level I'm good with. And I'm going to bring back the highlights just a little bit. It's a little too bright on her skin right here for me, so I'm going to take that down. And if you're unsure what a slider does, I mean, you really can't screw anything up, nothing that you can't reset. So I encourage you, if you want to see what it's really affecting, I mean, take it all the way one way or the other to kind of see you know, what that specific slider is doing. I mean, if you wanted kind of a lighter background, you could bump it up. I mean, it's really kind of neat that you can see everything in real time. So I feel that that's all I really have to do to that image exposure wise. Just bump it up a little bit, take the highlights down just a hair, and now I'm going to warm it up. So I'm going to take my warm, or my blue yellow slider, and drag it to the right just a little bit. And one thing I know from personal experience is that all the images from my camera always look just a little bit magenta. And depending on your monitor, it may not look that way at all. You know, if you're viewing this video, you're probably like, what are you talking about? But I know that my cameras are always just a little bit magenta. So I always take this slider down just a hair. You'll try to get down to 0. If you're having a hard time, you'll notice you can't always get, like, it kind of jumps. If you hold down the Shift key while you're using the slider, it'll go one by one, so you don't have those big jumps that you sometimes get. Alright, so I'm happy with that. As a little reminder, if you're working on an image and you know you came in working on it, and you're not really sure where you started and if it looks better, you have this before and after, and there's different ways that you can view. You can view it split, so it's one image before and after, but I really like seeing them side by side, and that definitely looks, you know, not a huge change, but it looks a lot better. So now one of the big things that I wanted to remind you of, I'm gonna turn this off, is the sync function. This is really what Lightroom is all about, being able to edit a bunch of images more efficiently. And one of the ways it does that is using this sync function. And the button's right down here. I still have all of my images selected from when I applied that preset. So I'm going to select my first image, and then I'm going to select through all of the images that I know were taken at the exact same spot. So I know that we really didn't go far. We were within like 10 feet of that same spot. So really they were all exposed pretty much the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this sync button. And by default, I always have everything checked all except crop, because you're never going to want to apply the same crop to every image. I've never run into a situation where that actually worked well. So I want everything, all the settings that I did to this image applied to all of these other ones that I selected. So I'm going to select synchronize, and you'll see them kind of brighten up a little bit here and there. Great. And if you want, you can cycle through them, and see, this one almost made a little bit too light. So I'm going to take the highlights down. This is one I'm going to straighten because it's a little cockeyed. I notice like this horizon line or this horizontal line isn't quite horizontal. So I'm going to use the crop tool. And anytime your cursor is outside, it shows you kind of that double-headed arrow, and that means rotate. So I'm going to click and hold, and then a nice little grid appears to help you align your image. Let go. That's better. Close. Good. Alright, so I'm just going to kind of go image to image and make sure that these synced settings worked well. Good. Go to this one. And again, I apologize, my computer's running a little bit slow because I have some other things going on in the background while I'm doing this. This one, her face is a little bit bright. I really like that one, that's a cute one. And these were almost a little bit too dark, so I'm going to brighten these up, and I can definitely see the magenta in her face. So I'm going to take out even more of that color. And now, because I know these were just seconds apart, they're the exact same pose, I'm going to sync those. And then if I pop over to this one, perfect, looks exactly the same. Alright, so this was a similar area. If any of you are familiar with White Pines, this is that stone bridge. We were over here, now we're over at the steps. Still, she's facing a different way, so a lot of the settings probably aren't going to be the same. So I'm going to go ahead and do my thing here. And these were all taken by those steps. So I'm going to sync. I'll go in and check them. This one was still a little dark, so I'm going to brighten it. This one, a little dark, a little crooked. Brighten it. This one I had kind of a goofy crop going on. I had so much space above her head. Not sure what I was doing there. And sometimes I'll just leave my crop tool on, because I crop a lot. You don't have to necessarily close it. You can still make adjustments while it's open. Alright, but now I'm going to close it because I'm going to go on to my next set here. Alright, this is one that I know I'm probably going to have to do a lot of Photoshop work too. But I kind of knew that going into it, so I'm going to brighten it. Give it some warmth. Get some of that magenta out of there. You too much. Put it right at 0. I'm going to add even more contrast. Bring some of those highlights back. Oh, this is one I'm probably going to have to really work on in Photoshop, but for my purposes, that's good here. I'm probably going to go ahead and try to sync those settings to this image and see where it gets me. Not too bad. Alright. This one's pretty good on its own. Warm it up. Again, pretty good on its own. One thing I noticed about this image is it's really shadowy on her face. So I'm going to zoom in and I'm going to use my adjustment brush tool, and I want to lighten just that area. So all my other sliders are at 0 or close to it. And we'll try 55. And it's important to remember, so when you're using this brush, you have that inside circle and the outside circle. And the inside circle is where the effect of the brush is going to be concentrated. And then between those two circles, kind of that ring, is where it kind of fades out. So you have better blending. So kind of the bigger the brush, the better. You won't see the harsh lines as much. But I'm just going to kind of go in here and paint a little bit of lightness on her face. And done. Zoom out. That's much better. Take those highlights down a little more. Okay, moving on. Alright, so we have all these water ones. So, up a little bit on the exposure. Warm it up quite a bit. Take some of that magenta down. Highlights down. This one I feel like it's kind of flat. Maybe play with the shadows a little bit. I like that. Alright, and all of these were taken in that same spot. So I'm going to select them, sync, sync. This is that one that I was a little unsure about. Like, I do not like the bottom half, but I really like her expression. I like her arms and the top. Cropping an image this much, you're losing a lot of quality, but I really like that. I'm going to see what I can do to kind of save it. Good. A little on the bright side. That one's almost not quite warm enough. Warm it up a little more. And crop in. Good. Alright, next set. And I'm going to sync those few. I'm not even going to bother looking at them. Exposure. Highlights. Warm it up. This is another one. It's just kind of a little bit flat. Darken the shadows a little bit, just bring a little more contrast. And I'm going to sync that across this one right next to it. Good. And this one was in the same spot, but I know it wasn't too dark. I must have changed my settings. Warm it up. Take that magenta out. And pull the highlights back a smidge. And let's see, good chunk of these were all taken in the same spot. In fact, they all look pretty equally exposed. I'm just gonna select this whole big block of them. Good. A little off center on my crop. Good. Good. A little bright. Good. A little bright. This is another one. I'm going to use that adjustment brush, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to do like one click on that spot. That's all I needed to do. Good. Again, a little too bright. Good. Cute. Little bright. Okay, this is a situation where I knew it wasn't a good place to be shooting, but I just wanted that background, and I thought it would be neat with this in the foreground. And I don't want to, I mean, she is dark. I don't want to lighten it up because that's just going to blow out an already light background. So I'm going to use that adjustment brush again, but I'm going to increase the size of it to kind of cover her whole face and body. And I'm just going to kind of brush it all over. You can be kind of sloppy with this brush for the most part, and usually it blends pretty well. So okay, done. That one does need to be warmed up a little more. Okay, keep moving. Alright. A little warmth. A little less magenta. And I will apply that to the rest of these. See how we did. A little dark. Definitely dark. Again, I'll probably use that brush. Take it down. Just one little click. That's all I need. And I know this is that one I was mentioning. I really love the picture, but that shadowing is just not great. It's just paint. Oh, kind of paint into her neck too. And the one thing after you paint with this, this kind of highlights for you, letting you know, hey, you can change the settings. So I just happened the settings I had it at to increase the exposure by 0.55 where I was painting. That just happened to be enough for all the images I was working on. But after the fact, if it's not bright enough or dark enough, you can adjust this. Done. And that last one, also one that I was planning on doing something artsy-fartsy with it. I don't really care about blowing out the sky. It's not going to be the same sky anyways. Alright, I'm happy with that. Now, the next step that I do after I've gone through all of them is I go back to my library. This is kind of my final check before I export. I'm going to go back to the top. And usually I'll actually step away from the computer for a little bit, kind of give my eyes a break, and then I'll do this. And what I'm doing is I'm just kind of getting a nice overview and kind of a comparison to make sure there is consistency with color, exposure, and whatnot. Like this one, for whatever reason, it's very subtle, but it's not quite as warm as these other ones. And I was shooting, even though it's the same spot, I was shooting down, so there wasn't as much sunlight coming into my lens, so that could have played a role. And that's where these kind of push buttons are nice. I just do one little click warmer, and then I just kind of keep rolling down. Looks good, looks good. I'm just kind of looking for ones that are really sticking out that I really didn't do light enough or dark enough, or the color was off. Like this one's a little too bright. These all look pretty good. Perfect. Good. All right, I'm happy with those. So now what I'm going to do, now these are still in RAW format. The only thing I've done to them, I haven't actually changed the files or done anything. What Lightroom does is it creates a very tiny file that saves the settings that you applied, which is kind of nice, for one, for space saving, but for two is that there's no saving required within the program. I can close it, I can go back in, like there is no file save image. It just, they're automatically there. Even if the program crashes, it's all still there. You open it, more than likely it'll be right where you left off, which is really, really neat. So the next step that I'm going to do after I've kind of gone through, done a last glance over, so to speak, is I'm going to select them all, and you can either do that by clicking the first one, going down, shift, and the last one, or you can do Control A. I apologize, Mac users, I can't remember your shortcut, but it's still going to be your Apple key or something like that, function plus A, and that'll select them all. Oops, my mouse is doing crazy things. And then I'm going to go to File, Export. Now your export savings, unless you're doing something funky, once you get them set, you'll never have to change them. So a few kind of key things to keep in mind. File settings down here should be JPEG and 100% quality. And sRGB, which it probably already is. You have the option to resize them when you export them. You can, there's a sharpening function, but I prefer to do that stuff manually. I want more control over it. And then the next two things that you'll probably mess with the most, once you have things like your file settings, that should always stay the same. So these are the things that you'll probably mess with anytime that you export. One is file naming. So how do you want these files named? If you leave it unchecked, it will name them the same way that your camera named them, but with a JPEG instead of a CR2 or an NEF for Nikon users. So I always rename them, unless I'm going to be like swapping heads. I'm going to be getting rid of an image for some reason, then I'm not going to bother renaming them. I'm going to use a different program to rename them, because if I rename them and they're all nicely named, whatever I put in and numbered, well, if I delete one, then you're missing one in the series, and that doesn't really make sense. So I just put what I name it at. It'll usually automatically start it out at 1, and it's going to show you, it's going to be named this, dash, and it's going to start your numbers off at 1. Export to. So I always, there's some different options. I always set it to same folder as original photo, and then I put it in a subfolder. So for my purposes, I call them final. I call the folder final. You can call it JPEG. Whatever makes you sleep better at night, you can name it anything you want, but kind of the main takeaway from here is that you're putting it in a folder inside of where these where these images are located at. I like having everything in one place. I don't like Because I work with thousands and thousands and thousands of images, I don't like things scattered. I just like everything kind of contained and nested. So I put everything in a subfolder inside the folder where these images were. And I click export. And then it's going to look like nothing's happening, but up here you'll see it's busy converting those files to JPEGs. And I'm going to stop at this point because this is going to take quite a while because I have another process running in the background, and we will pick up from here.